massive leak, more than 11 million records, is shedding light on how dark money flows through the global financial system.
Boîte noire des paradis fiscaux, caverne d'Alibaba de l'évasion fiscale.
These types of offshore entities have been used for decades.
Système d'évasion fiscale touchant des hauts responsables politiques.
Чорний скандал. Міжнародний консорціум журналістів опублікував масштабне розслідування про
capi di governo, imprenditori, politici,
For involvement with terrorist organizations or authoritarian regimes like North Korea, Syria.
Chiffres et bénéficiaires donnent le vertige. On y trouve 6 chefs d'État.
Over the last decade, the largest international banks have been involved in multiple scandals. One name embodies the excesses of this renegade finance: HSBC.
No matter where you live, no matter what kind of business you are in, if you wish to enter the offshore system, HSBC is likely to be your bank.
Il y a à la fois l'argent de la drogue, à la fois l'argent du terrorisme, à la fois l'argent des diamantaires belges, à la fois l'argent du Gotha, du showbiz.
From Geneva to Hong Kong, from New York to Paris, this financial empire has created a unique network to move dirty money around the world.
HSBC is considered one of the best money laundering institutions globally.
From tax evasion to money laundering for the mafia and manipulation of currency, HSBC has its hands in a variety of illicit activities.
Affiliates of drug cartels were literally walking into bank branches with hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars of US cash.
We are here today to announce the filing of criminal charges against HSBC Bank.
This bank had done everything bad that a bank can possibly do.
Often pursued, but never condemned.
How many billions of dollars do you have to launder for drug lords before somebody says, we're shutting you down?
HSBC enjoys unbelievable impunity and continues to earn more profits.
Normally, this bank would have been closed down. They would have lost their license to operate.
From London, HSBC bankers have rendered governments powerless.
I'm responsible for cleaning it up.
Jail time for bankers' crime.
Do banks still get away with murder, so to speak? They do. It's capitalism, and the big banks hold a lot of sway.
On a besoin d'honnêteté et de morale. Et il faut que les grands patrons des grandes banques viennent s'expliquer devant le peuple.
HSBC a été de tous les scandales. Au moment où le cœur de la finance internationale se déplace vers l'Asie, la grande question c'est quel est son prochain coup?
HSBC stands for Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation. In Hong Kong, it is simply called the bank. It's here that HSBC was born and where it makes the bulk of its profits. Hong Kong is the new El Dorado of world finance. Every year, the city is enriched by hundreds of billions of euros accumulated by new Chinese fortunes.
Hong Kong probably is the only city in the world who understands China better than everybody. You want to trade in China, you never set foot in China. It's not an easy place to understand. But we, because of the fact that we're so close, and actually culturally we're so close, We understand what China wants, or what China businessmen or China people wants. We are specialized middlemen in dealing with China, if you like. At the same time, I think most people in China doesn't understand how the Western world works. And so if I'm a rich Chinese wanting to invest in the world, probably the first thing I do is to call my friends in Hong Kong and say, who should I talk to?
Hong Kong symbolizes the great shift of wealth from the West to Asia, and HSBC benefits from its unique position. It is the most Chinese of Western banks, or the most European of Chinese banks.
People in China, when they come to Hong Kong, they immediately get comfortable or familiar with HSBC. What you often see is those Chinese tourists came to your bank branch with a basket in which you have full of cash. Okay. That's the early days. Okay. It's not a secret, but it happened.
Seeing the changes going from a communist-driven country to now a semi-capitalist, more capitalist than most countries in the world, the success of China being there is like living in a living history book. And so HSBC is part of that. I have been with HSBC for so many years. I can honestly say HSBC has made most of the tycoons in Hong Kong that you see today, the billionaires in Hong Kong, all of them, most of them came out of HSBC.
Hong Kong is the Switzerland of Asia. For new Chinese billionaires, it serves as a hub to invest their fortunes. To the rest of the world, it offers a whole range of top-of-the-line financial services.
This place is likely to attract a lot of dirty money. This is a highly secretive jurisdiction, but it's also a huge financial entrepreneur. Obviously, with such a large Chinese market and so on, it's a very big offshore financial center. That combination of scale of operation and scale of secrecy makes it one of the world's biggest and, in our opinion, one of the greatest threats to the global financial markets. It's very easy, sitting in Hong Kong, to contact your counterparts in BVI and Tortola and say, can you create a company for us? And they can do it instantly. You'll have it within 24 hours.
In April 2016, a handful of investigative journalists unveiled a treasure, 11 million confidential documents that revealed the operations of a law office specializing in tax evasion. This became the Panama Papers scandal.
L'onde de choc planétaire provoquée par le scandale Panama Papers.
The size of the Panama Papers leak is bigger than anything we've seen.
From this black box of money laundering, two key players emerge: Hong Kong and the bank HSBC.
We knew this was a major go-to bank for individuals and for companies who wished to benefit from the secrecy that the offshore system provided. So I or one of my colleagues searched the Panama Papers database with the term HSBC, and you saw thousands of results, thousands of emails, thousands of Excel documents, thousands of Word documents that in some way were discussing HSBC's role in this offshore system.
Hong Kong has traditionally turned a fairly blind eye to where money might be coming from. Panama Papers in Hong Kong, the impact has been less than almost everywhere else, despite the fact that the largest volume of offshore companies were created by Hong Kong people. And in the middle of this sort of offshore bank or treasury is one of the world's largest banks, that was the entire reason it was established, to do exactly this sort of thing.
Hong Kong is a safe haven for HSBC. A safe haven with two faces. One is represented by the dozens of branches that finance individuals and businesses. The other is invisible, creating shell companies to launder money from crime, corruption, and tax evasion.
It is interesting that the HSBC bank that you and I know, that we might walk in front of every day on the way to work or the way to school, does seem like a world away from the kind of HSBC whose activities and whose clients emerge in Panama Papers. Certainly we saw an incredible number of Chinese residents, businessmen and women, and of course many family members associated with leading Communist Party figures who appeared in the Panama Papers and who often used Hong Kong as a conduit to the offshore world. They're not the kind of clients who walk in on a bright Tuesday morning to draw a check or to make a deposit.
I just shake my head at much of what I see. Hong Kong doesn't have currency controls at its border. You know, if you can get the money out of China, you can fill up an 18-wheel truck and drive the cash in. Nobody's going to ask you to declare that.
As a former undercover agent working within the money laundering networks of drug cartels, Bill Mosher is now working for the Chinese government. He tracks the flow of illegal money leaving the country.
The two largest acts of money laundering that I'm aware of in Hong Kong in the last 8-9 years led to the conviction of a 65-year-old illiterate village woman who laundered in cash about $1 billion US. It's a huge amount for a little old illiterate woman to be coming in all the time, dropping off $30 million in physical cash. And shortly after that, the next person of note who brought in $13 billion in physical cash was a high school dropout who used to drive across a truck across the border from Guangdong every day with about 50 million. How can that much money move into a system and nobody but the strawmen, the dumbest two in it, get jail time?
Sure, 40 years ago, perhaps Hong Kong was the Wild West, but we have come a long way. And I don't think that it would be fair to say that Hong Kong is a tax haven country wherever the money comes from. I don't have an idea of how much money is going out of China. We don't keep track of the source of the money in Hong Kong, whether it's from China, whether it's from India, from Singapore, from Japan. That has always been the case, and that will continue to be the case.
Laura Chaw is the face of the Manhattan of Asia. She also embodies the obscurity of this financial center. Close to the Chinese leaders with whom she once worked as a stock market control agent, she now advises the Hong Kong government while serving on the board of HSBC.
What was the impact of the Panama Papers in Hong Kong?
It was an item, a headline for a few days. I don't think anybody was talking about the Panama Paper anymore.
Today are days of morality. It's rather immoral to have tax evasion.
There's no problem for Hong Kong companies to incorporate BVI or Cayman Island or Bermuda companies, and some of these are listed on our market.
And there's no problem with that?
There's no problem, yeah.
In Hong Kong, HSBC is untouchable. The favored bank of the Chinese is protected by the highest authorities. It has always been one of the pillars of local power.
HSBC is so much part of the fabric in Hong Kong. And, you know, a lot of people have an account with HSBC. People don't think twice about it. It really is very much part of life. Maybe that's the success of HSBC.
The history of HSBC is deeply linked to the history of Hong Kong. The bank and the former colony were born at the same moment more than 150 years ago. At the time, the British Crown dreamt of conquering the Chinese market that was closed to Westerners. The first settlers chose the fishing port in Hong Kong as the base for their commercial offensive.
It was a place known for piracy, known for disease, known for prostitution, and it was a place that you had to be careful about investing. Back in the UK or England, there was a song that people sang in pubs called "You Go to Hong Kong for Me." I don't want to go there, right? So you go there for me instead.
The British began trading opium, destined for the Chinese market. Given the success of the drug, the emperor burns the cargo of the traffickers. London sends in its military fleet and triggers the Opium War. The Chinese capitulate, and the British gain possession of Hong Kong for 99 years.
The British were controlling large parts of India, where opium was grown. And basically, the British realized that opium was something that people wanted, and they realized that they had a lot of opium to offer, right? So before opium really sort of took off, the balance of trade was in the favor of the Chinese. Once opium becomes such a big product, the balance of trade actually goes toward the British side.
The opium trade has its golden age, and the settlers need a bank. They create HSBC, the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation. The most notorious traffickers in the city, mostly Scottish, sit on the first board of directors.
I would say that HSBC was not necessarily created by opium traders, but was created by traders who happened to be involved in opium.
It's often been said about HSBC that much of its culture has derived from those Scottish origins, by which really what people mean, that's a polite way of saying that they tend to be thrifty and they look after their money, and also hard-working and conscientious, the sort of classic Scottish qualities, really. These were practical men. They weren't intellectuals. Indeed, it was a bit like as it were, like a regiment. Had its own code, its own culture, looked at the outside world often with some suspicion.
In Hong Kong, HSBC takes power. It prints the local currency, finances the construction of the city, and serves the interest of Her Majesty in the Far East.
There were 3 or 4 great powers in that quite small place, and one, of course, was the governor, as appointed by the British government, and one was the chairman of the jockey club, which was responsible for the horse racing. But a third great power was always the chairman of HSBC. HSBC were always right there at the top, yes.
Hong Kong continues to be the most important source of earnings and profitability for HSBC. If Hong Kong does well, HSBC does well. If HSBC does well, Hong Kong does well.
HSBC has never changed its DNA. Formerly the Bank of Pirates, it continues to function on the dark side of finance. The only difference is, it no longer operates only in Hong Kong. The bank has become a global empire. HSBC nearly shut down. The fate of the bank was played out in the United States in 2012, 4 years after the outbreak of the financial crisis.
We are here today to announce the filing of criminal charges against HSBC Bank for its sustained and systemic failure to guard against the corruption of our financial system by drug traffickers and other criminals, and for evading U.S. sanctions law.
The Minister of Justice accuses HSBC of laundering the money of the Mexican and Colombian cartels that control the trafficking of cocaine. Nearly 1 billion euros were said to have passed through its Mexican subsidiary before being recycled into the U.S. economy.
Affiliates of drug cartels were literally walking into bank branches with hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars of U.S. cash in Mexico and putting it through the teller window, sometimes in boxes that were specially designed to fit through the teller window. And the HSBC employees took it, they deposited it, and gave the person a receipt and never reported the conduct and never stopped it. And that didn't happen once, it didn't happen twice, it happened systematically over the course of about a decade. There was one occasion, an individual walks into the bank with maybe $3 or $4 million, and bank employees spent one full day counting it. So that's just a few million. Imagine that multiplied by several hundredfold. And that's what 881 million represents.
The investigation is overwhelming. Not only have bank employees worked hand in hand with criminal organizations responsible for thousands of murders, but their managers ignored all of the warning signs.
The bank had been warned repeatedly and consistently by US authorities and by Mexican authorities. They also were told that they had recordings from drug lords that said that HSBC was the place to launder money. Well, London knew everything, and they just didn't care.
The accusations are serious. The bank risks losing its license in the United States. The case may precipitate the fall of a company that employs 300,000 people on 5 continents and manages a sum of $3,000 billion. If HSBC were a country, it would be the 5th world economic power. Bank leaders travel to Washington to be auditioned by the Senate.
Please stand, raise your right hand.
HSBC must be rescued.
Do you swear that the testimony that you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. I recognize that there have been some significant areas of failure. I have said before, and I will say again, despite the best efforts and intentions of many dedicated professionals, HSBC has fallen short of our own expectations and the expectations of our regulators.
And they come up before these hearings, and they're very contrite, and they sort of try to deflect responsibility, and then the Senate asks more questions, and they're more contrite, and they deflect more responsibility, and then the thing's over, and they talk to the media for a minute, and then it sort of blows over, and then a settlement either happens or it doesn't.
The group has always had as a core element of its compliance policy a focus on both the letter and the spirit of laws and regulations, not just what is permissible, but what is prudent and responsible.
Most of the executives that have been called before the Senate investigation committees have effectively dodged all of the questions fairly significantly. So from that perspective, the HSBC executives are almost reading from the same script, being directed by the same director as the senior executives from the American banks.
Thank you for your time. I welcome this opportunity to answer any questions.
We are going to recess now until 2 o'clock. We thank our witnesses. And you are discharged.
The Obama administration is divided. The Department of Justice wants to set an example, while the Treasury Department advocates an amicable settlement. HSBC involves the rising star of British politics, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne. He writes a letter to his counterpart, Timothy Geithner, and to the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, in which he defends the HSBC cause.
Dear Ben, questions about HSBC's continued ability to clear U.S. dollar would risk destabilizing the bank globally, with serious implications for financial and economic stability, particularly in Europe and Asia. I am copying this letter to Treasury Secretary Geithner, with whom I have also discussed this issue. Best wishes, George Osborne.
Finance Minister George Osborne put enormous political pressure on the US government. George Osborne saw this as a key part of protecting the City of London. Normally, this bank would have been closed down. They would have lost their license to operate in the United States.
Remember, in 2012, you've just come out of the crisis of 2009, so there's a great concern not to restart that. And it's George Osborne saying, listen, this is a very powerful global bank, and if you indict it, it's going to put the financial system under strain. That kind of power says something about the power that banks have in the international system.
2 months later, the U.S. government yields to pressure from George Osborne and the business community. HSBC escapes trial. Its leaders are spared, and the high officials of the Department of Justice keep a low profile.
Look, our goal here is not to bring HSBC down. It's not to cause a systemic effect on the economy. It's not for people to lose thousands of jobs. It's to...
Are they too big to prosecute?
I wouldn't say it's too big to prosecute. I'm not going to say that. Underlying crime. I don't think anyone is alleging...
The bank is eventually fined 2 billion euros, the equivalent of 1 month's profits.
For an average person who hears the number, the fine is extraordinary. For the bank that is global in reach, that is making a huge amount of money, the fine is a kind of parking ticket. At the end of the day, the fine is not paid by the officers and directors of the company. The fine is paid by the shareholders. So in effect, it's a parking ticket given to the wrong people.
Did I feel cheated by paying the huge fines that, no, I felt angry at the regulators. I think, yes, because the amount was obscene.
Come on, Alan. This is not the regulator being harsh. This is banker doing things which are abominable.
Listen, when you're dealing in Mexico, for argument's sake, yes, there is a lot of drug money, and it was just part of banking, and money just got transferred around all over the world, I think everyone realizes they just maybe were naive.
HSBC saved its skin. The bank gives rise to a new privilege, namely that of being too big to jail. That is to say, above the law. But the refusal to send bankers to jail triggers the anger of the public. The Department of Treasury officials are put under fire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you all three for being here today. How many billions of dollars do you have to launder for drug lords, and how many economic sanctions do you have to violate before someone will consider shutting down a financial institution like this? Mr. Cohen, can we start with you?
For our part, we imposed on HSBC the largest penalties that we had ever imposed on any financial institution.
Let me just move you along here, though, on the point, Mr. Cohen. My question is, in your opinion, how many billions of dollars do you have to launder for drug lords before somebody says, we're shutting you down?
Well, Senator, the actions, and I'm sure the regulators can address this issue, the actions that we took in the HSBC case, we thought were appropriate in that instance.
Governor Powell, perhaps you can help me out here?
Sure. We don't do criminal investigation. And in the case of HSBC, we gave essentially the statutory maximum civil money penalties, and we gave very stringent cease and desist orders, and we did what we have the legal authority to do.
And I'll just say here, if you're caught with an ounce of cocaine, the chances are good you're going to go to jail. If it happens repeatedly, you may go to jail for the rest of your life. But evidently, if you launder nearly $1 billion for drug cartels and violate our international sanctions, your company pays a fine and you go home and sleep in your own bed at night. Every single individual associated with this. And I think that's fundamentally wrong.
I agree with most. You could say, well, the banks are getting off a lot lighter than criminals who are individuals. And my response to that would be, well, of course, because criminals can't tear down the system, and HSBC can.
HSBC bought its impunity by being big. And so by virtue of being big, they effectively get to continue to operate with impunity.
The banksters, the gangster bankers, made the world's leading economic power fold, all in the name of so-called international financial stability.
You have to ask, if you don't prosecute these people, who the hell are you going to prosecute? Who has jurisdiction over an institution that operates in 100 countries? Who has the responsibility for taking on that kind of criminal undertaking?
HSBC is already more than a bank. It has grown in magnitude and is now as powerful as some states. This is the culmination of a strategy launched 20 years ago. It all began in 1997. Great Britain officially hands over Hong Kong to the People's Republic of China. This marks the end of the British Empire in the Far East after a century and a half of domination.
The story of this great city is about the years before this night and the years of success that will surely follow it.
The bank has to choose: move with the crown or stay and be in the grip of China.
HSBC, their principal worry was a concern that post-1997, the Chinese authorities might insist that the management of HSBC become more Chinese in character, that the top people be Chinese. And for that generation of British people running the HSBC, that was unacceptable, really.
At that time, many people in Hong Kong felt that Hong Kong was being abandoned. You know, we felt kind of betrayed. You kind of felt somebody was turning your back. Many people thought, whoa, this is the end of the bank.
HSBC decides to have it both ways. It moves its headquarters to London, but keeps the heart of its business in Hong Kong. China has just opened its borders and promises to be a fabulous market. The priority is to flatter the new masters of Beijing.
They described their brief as to create the best bank building in the world. The building was a statement of confidence. It was about stability, it was about permanence, it was a gesture of confidence in a future beyond the transition of a colony into part of China. It was also making a statement about ambition. HSBC at that time was a local bank, and they have become one of the global players. The full extent of that we were only to realize later.
A pioneer of globalization, HSBC intends to spread its Chinese DNA. In the early 2000s, it is the first foreign bank to establish itself in China. Its president, Stephen Green, serves as an ambassador of capitalism to the leaders of the Communist Party.
The people in London
They know so well about China. They spend 1/3 their time, or 20% of their time, if not more, in Hong Kong and travel to China constantly.
While the Chinese economy is emerging as the engine of global growth, HSBC executives strategized their position.
Initially, we were actually advisors to Bank of China, Shanghai to raise capital. So during the process, the president of Bank of Shanghai asked me, what about your own bank? We love HSBC to be part of our investor groups. So I reported back to Stephen Green, and actually Stephen was quite good. Stephen took a flight, went to Shanghai together with me, had a dinner with the president of Bank of Shanghai. After dinner, he came out to say, I like this bank, and also I trust that individual. Let's do the investment. And of course, the payoff was good too.
HSBC triples its investment and pockets nearly 300 million euros. The bank extends its honeymoon with Beijing by exploiting its own history. Under the dictatorship of Mao, it was the only bank to maintain a presence in China. When the giant woke up, HSBC was already firmly in place.
It was a terrific message that HSBC were able to give, to say we were always there, we never left. And it's always tried hard to compare itself with the American banks. And it takes flying. These American banks, they come and they go. We British, we stick around and stay. It's the Chinese philosophy, isn't it? Think long.
Once again, history will accelerate the fate of HSBC. In September 2007, the financial crisis hits the streets of London.
That I want to close this account at totally cynical attitude to your customers.
Panic seizes the clients of Northern Rock and threatens to spread to other banks. The British government proposes lending them money as an emergency response. HSBC snubs the meeting and refuses any public assistance.
Being bailed out by the government, being given capital by the government, means that the government has influence on you. And HSBC wanted to be able to say, you don't have this influence on us. We are independent. We're fine. We can recapitalize ourselves. And if you try to force us, as one interlocutor told me, if you try to force us to take your money, we will take you to court and sue. You could ask, well, isn't this really arrogant? It is arrogant, but it is also the ability of the bank to signal to a government, we're a global bank, you're a single government, and so think about the relative power between us.
HSBC bankers prefer to turn to their friends, Hong Kong businessmen who made their fortunes through trade with China. The bank offers to sell them 18 billion euros of shares.
We knew when the bank was facing some problems, we have to help out. And the share price was very, very low at the time. And for most business people, the best thing was, why not take a share of the rights issue? And those people that did very, very well.
Did you make a lot of money on that deal?
Did I make a lot of money on that deal? I think that, yes. Normally we don't give out figures, but it's a nice profit.
Since that transaction, the price of each share has tripled. As always, HSBC made its shareholders rich. But history will remember that for the first time, Chinese money rescued a British bank. From now on, it is Beijing that holds the reins as the champion of globalization.
The whole idea of HSBC was to link businesses around the world. And so without the likes of HSBC, globalization wouldn't have been possible, really. You need that framework, that architecture of finance in order to power a global economy. Just think in very practical terms of, a company in China that wants to trade with a company in America. HSBC is very, very well placed because they have bigger operations in both markets. They can follow that whole trade.
Driven by its Chinese business, HSBC is taking advantage of the crisis. While its competitors suffer losses, it is crowned at Westminster. Its president, Stephen Green, enters the House of Lords.
I, Stephen, Lord Green of Hurstmere Point, do swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, her heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
The banker, who is also a deacon, preaches the good word on Sunday at church, where he criticizes the influence of money.
Lord Green was himself an upstanding member of society as well as being a moral banker, if you like. So he was the acceptable face of banking at a time when most bankers were not acceptable.
Immediately after, Stephen Green entered the government as Minister of State for Trade and Investment. Prime Minister David Cameron adopts HSBC's strategy. He also dreams of becoming a hero of globalization.
And I also want you at the same time to sell Britain as a destination for inward investment. I think with the change we're seeing in the world economy, rather sluggish growth in Europe, but fantastically fast growth from India, from China, from Brazil, Turkey.
It was probably a dream come true for him, and this, of course, was at a time when the Cameron government and George Osborne, the then Chancellor, were very, very keen to build up Britain's links to Asia and to China in particular.
The promotion of Stephen Green is the doing of the pro-Chinese lobby, led by the Chancellor George Osborne. The one who saved HSBC from the American justice system. An informal pact unites the two actors. Stephen Green opens the doors of the Chinese market to British companies. And in exchange, George Osborne is committed to defending the interests of the bank and of its former president, all over the world.
George Osborne's fascination with China is quite simple. It's almost the same as mine. He realizes how important 1.3 billion Chinese people are to the future of the world economy and wanted to put the UK right in the middle of that relationship. And the Chinese appreciated that hand of friendship in a really dramatic way. And it helped consolidate this, what we call now this golden relationship. Obviously, HSBC carries directly its history from China, so they think China.
Nothing seems to be able to derail the banking giant. Protected by London, blessed by Beijing, HSBC serves as a go-between for the two capitals. Who would dare attack it? In Paris, a senior official of the finance ministry is waiting for his chance to go on the offensive. He's gotten his hands on HSBC's best-kept secret, the list of 100,000 customers who hold accounts in Switzerland. These documents were given to him by a former computer scientist of the bank. They reveal in detail the clandestine circuits that make it possible to clean dirty money. There's talk of 180 billion euros, more than the budget of the European Union.
Il y a un service en France qui s'appelle l'ADNEF, qui est basé à Pantin. Ce sont environ 450 employés d'élite. Ce sont des espions fiscaux au bénéfice de la France qui traquent justement les fauteurs de troubles, les délinquants fiscaux. Et là, en l'occurrence, ils s'étaient mis complètement au service de cette opération qu'ils avaient appelée l'opération Chocolat. Et évidemment, Chocolat suisse. Ils ont l'esprit taquin à l'ADNEF. Et en l'occurrence, ils avaient donc un patron qui s'appelle Roland Veilpeau, qui était un patron extrêmement offensif, extrêmement agressif, qui voulait récupérer cet argent. C'est un chasseur en quelque sorte.
Pour les agents du fisc, pour les spécialistes de la finance, c'est pas quelque chose qu'on découvrait. Mais personne n'avait eu le loisir d'observer des choses qui par nature sont cachées ou secrètes. Et là, ce qu'on a vu apparaître, c'est quelque chose de gigantesque et industriel, avec des armées d'avocats, d'experts comptables, de cabinets conseils et tout ça.
Múltiple información económica, medios de comunicación pusieron al descubierto la mayor filtración bancaria obtenida en toda la historia.
В отделении банка HSBC разгорается скандал из-за утечки в прессу.
Swiss Leaks. It's under this name that the world media reveals the scandal and publishes the names of fraudsters. To mafiosi, heads of state, dictators, or ordinary citizens, to all its customers, HSBC offers numbered anonymous accounts and provides turnkey shell companies to evade the laws. The only condition? Customers must deposit at least 1 million euros.
Il y a à la fois l'argent de la drogue, à la fois l'argent du terrorisme, à la fois l'argent des diamantaires belges, à la fois l'argent des chirurgiens dentistes français, à la fois l'argent du Gotha, du showbiz, de l'aristocratie française et européenne. C'est l'argent qui vient vraiment de tous les endroits, tous les domaines possibles. Là où il y a de l'argent, il fallait à un moment donné, c'était un sport national, cacher son argent en Suisse, chez HSBC.
On proposait aux gens qui, pour une raison ou une autre, voulaient garder un profil bas, on leur proposait de s'acheter une société offshore, Panama, BVI, Cayman, n'importe quoi. Toutes les banques de la place se faisaient de la concurrence, ça c'est absolument clair. On ne pouvait grandir que par l'apport d'argent frais.
Wealth managers operate at the heart of this vast network. They are the special envoys of the bank to the four corners of the world, responsible for attracting customers and repatriating funds to Switzerland.
Il fallait venir en France, traverser la frontière avec des manières un peu d'agents secrets. C'est-à-dire qu'il fallait évidemment pas que le fisc français soit au courant. Donc il y avait des méthodes qui étaient employées avec des ordinateurs dissimulés, des clés cryptées et autres. Et il fallait ensuite appâter les plus gros clients qu'on rapatriait en Suisse.
HSBC laundering is methodically organized. Clandestine operations are the subject of internal reports archived in the bank's Swiss safes.
This customer forbids us to contact him in Belgium. It is always he who calls us. He
He comes under the name of a footballer, Zidane or Cruyff, for example, who wants to know the price of caviar, that is, the total amount of his assets.
HSBC s'est dit, OK, on va pouvoir convaincre la clientèle que nous avons d'ouvrir des comptes à Genève, à Zurich ou à Lugano, dans l'empire bancaire privé qu'ils ont acheté en Europe.
Le fait que des banques se sont emparées de toutes les techniques modernes de production de documents, de trucs, pour la mettre au service de la fraude et du crime. J'ai trouvé ça m'a déstabilisé.
Genève, par rapport à Londres, n'était pas indépendant. Il ne faut pas croire ça. C'est clair qu'il y avait un énorme travail de coordination et de direction qui venait de Londres, puisque nous avions des membres de la maison mère au conseil de la Banque suisse. Donc Londres était informé de ce qui se passait à Genève.
After the laundering case of drug money in the United States, the revelations about the tax evasion of VIPs was more unwanted than ever. HSBC becomes public enemy number one. Even the Swiss feel obliged to intervene. A raid is organized in front of the cameras.
Le but de cette enquête est précisément de vérifier si les informations qui ont été rendues publiques sont fondées et s'il y a de facto des reproches qui peuvent être faits soit à la banque.
Ici, on parle de gros dossiers, on parle de milliers de documents, on parle de quantités astronomiques de données informatiques. Pour vous dire, lorsque nous avons copié les serveurs d'HSBC, il a fallu plusieurs jours pour faire tourner les appareils servant à copier les données. Donc voilà, c'était suffisamment important pour qu'il n'y ait pas moyen, techniquement même, d'effacer rapidement toutes ces données.
Le problème du gouvernement suisse et des autorités publiques suisses, ils sont le dos au mur. Et ils voient immédiatement les conséquences titanesques, c'est le tremblement de terre. Eux, ils partent du principe depuis un siècle qu'ils donnent tous les éléments pour que la finance internationale vienne en Suisse, elle y trouve un nid douillet où ils pourront faire leur business sans être embêtés.
The Swiss judiciary closed the investigation 3 months later. In exchange for its commitment to purge unwanted customers, HSBC is fined 40 million euros. After the fine imposed by the Americans, the Swiss settled for chump change.
L'amende maximale qui peut être infligée en droit suisse pour blanchiment d'argent est de 5 millions de francs suisses. Lorsque vous faites une négociation, il ne suffit pas d'avoir des cartes. Il y a aussi le colt que vous avez à la ceinture. Et en tant que procureur en Suisse, par rapport aux établissements financiers, c'est un colt de très petit calibre.
Qu'ils aient réussi à négocier ça à 40 millions, c'est bien, ça prouve qu'ils ont de bons négociateurs.
Je rêve d'un jour où les juges d'instruction français émettront des mandats d'arrêt internationaux contre les grands patrons des banques suisses et les obligeront à venir menotter à Paris. Alors, on m'a dit, non mais, Veilpo, comme d'habitude, il déconne, je ne déconne pas du tout. On a besoin d'honnêteté et de morale. Et il faut que les grands patrons des grandes banques qui commettent des choses comme ça viennent s'expliquer devant le peuple, c'est-à-dire à la barre d'un tribunal.
There will be no lawsuit against HSBC, nor the bankers at the court of law. In France and in Belgium, for example, ministers of justice prefer to negotiate. As for the Parisian official who had gotten too close to the fire, he is dismissed from the investigation.
Roland Velpeau, il est en vacances en Chine, on l'appelle, on lui dit Roland, quand tu rentres, passe me voir. C'était le directeur des relations humaines de Bercy qui lui a dit écoute, là tu es déchargé du dossier, tu pars à Melun, je crois, pour devenir conservateur des hypothèques. Ça faisait 2 ans seulement qu'il était en poste. Normalement, on reste 5 ans en poste. Donc là, il a bien compris que c'était pour une raison simple, on l'avait déjà demandé avant, c'était arrête avec cette opération chocolat, il y a trop d'enjeux, on se fâche avec la Suisse, on se fâche avec Nicolas Sarkozy, on se fâche avec beaucoup de gens, on va passer à autre chose, on va mettre un peu le pied dessus.
HSBC was saved once again. The bank is no longer just too big to jail. Its influence goes beyond the financial sphere and guarantees it complete impunity. The only concession? The former president, Stephen Green, disappears from the picture.
You know, when you were in charge at HSBC,
no comment to make.
HSBC, your bankers were helping people dodge tax. Why did you let them do that?
As I think I've explained, I'm not prepared to make any comments on HSBC's business, past or present.
I know, but you sort of have to, because at the time you were on
The former model banker, who was to reconcile finance and morality, is now tracked as a fugitive.
After all that had gone on at HSBC, you then got promoted to the government. You must have been amazed.
You need to talk to HSBC, I'm sorry.
One word, sir. Any word? Anything you can say that defends what happened? No word.
Reverend Stephen Green, Lord Reverend Stephen Green, you know, a pillar of the UK establishment. I met him a couple of times, and both times he gave me the impression of a man who wasn't happy being in the limelight, prefers to lurk in the shadows, slightly a manipulator, maybe even Machiavellian in his character.
How much did you know about the secret bank accounts at HSBC? I think the country demands an answer to that, not simply the people in this church.
Lord Green had presided over HSBC when they had acquired the Swiss branch. He knew all that. And what was particularly awful about Lord Green was, of course, that he had been appointed by David Cameron to be a trade minister. I thought this was absolutely shocking, and I thought he should come and give an account of himself to my committee. But this is one of the few times when politics trumped.
The matter is political. Stephen Green, the former Secretary of State, can bring down David Cameron's government.
Does the Prime Minister expect us to believe that in Stephen Green's 3 years as a minister, he never had a conversation with him about what was happening at HSBC?
My responsibility is the tax laws of this country, and no one has been tougher. This government has been tougher than any previous government. That's why they're desperate. That's why they're losing.
Mr. Connor Burns!
Some parliamentarians refuse to bury the case and prosecute the bank. But no investigation will be launched, neither by the tax authorities nor by the British courts. The elected officials will have to content themselves with hearing from the leaders of HSBC. And it's the turn of the new boss, Stuart Gulliver, to begin the series of auditions.
So I have made substantial changes, which hopefully we'll get the chance to explain to you all.
3 years after Washington, the same scenario with the same script is being replayed in London.
I'd like to put on the record an apology from both myself and from Douglas for the unacceptable events that took place at our private bank in Switzerland in the mid-2000s. which is clearly an apology we'd like to make to you all, to our customers, our shareholders, to the public at large.
You do understand how this looks today?
The example comes from up high. The manager himself received his bonuses on an account in Switzerland, managed by a ghost company based in Panama.
Structure that at a particular time of Swiss private bank.
He had family here, he was born here, he sent his children to here, he worked from here, he voted here, and yet because he claimed that his residence was in Hong Kong, he didn't pay British tax. And when we asked him, why don't you pay the proper tax? His reply was quite interesting, because he said he didn't want other people in the bank to know how much he earned.
So it was set up for reasons of privacy and no nefarious reasons whatsoever.
How much did you put into the Panama account?
It was $7.5 million US.
Stuart Gulliver was one of the best paid investment bankers in the world. I think that tells you that he really cares about money.
Mr. Gulliver will get on a lot faster if you give a straight answer to a straight question. You agree with me it's caused reputational damage to the bank?
Yes.
Are you the appropriate person in those circumstances to remain as the Chief Executive Officer of HSBC?
I believe I am, because my tax affairs are in order.
He said he couldn't understand why the question was so aggressive.
Yeah, it just shows you, I suppose, that bankers of his generation who grew up as investment bankers in the pre-crisis world were living in a bubble. When they are face-to-face with parliamentarians, they sometimes get exposed for living in those bubbles.
Has Gulliver changed?
I don't think Stuart Gulliver can fundamentally change.
HSBC and its leaders are forever untouchable. The largest employer of the city, the pillar of the British economy, the bank imposes its own rules. At the time of the first revelations of the Swiss leaks scandal, it could count on the censorship imposed by the conservative daily newspaper, the Daily Telegraph. Its editor-in-chief resigns and publicly denounces the influence of HSBC.
The Telegraph's recent coverage of HSBC amounts to a form of fraud on its readers. It has been placing what it perceives to be the interest of a major international bank above its duty to bring the news to Telegraph readers. There's only one word to describe the situation: terrible.
HSBC is exploiting its advantage. It threatens to free itself from the control of London and to repatriate its headquarters to Hong Kong. Its protector, George Osborne, is still Chancellor of the Exchequer. And in addition to granting tax advantages, offers to fire Martin Wheatley, the managing director of the Financial Services Authority and a longtime opponent. The bank backs down from moving.
One of the ministers once said to me in a corridor in the middle of these hearings, do you realize that what you're doing is putting them off from coming to the UK? And I laughed because I thought he was joking. And then I realized he was serious.
The Swiss leaks scandal was the last chance to sanction HSBC's practices. The authorities preferred to delegate to the bank the power to control itself. It has since recruited 9,000 people, tasked with identifying suspicious transactions, and to denounce them internally. Case closed. The banksters say that they've changed.
economist. I've been involved in financial market regulation for decades. I've heard this, that was in the past. That was 10 years ago. Now, 10 years ago, I heard HSB saying that was in the past. And yet scandals that have emerged show that their claims 10 years ago were hollow. At this stage, I don't believe it. I do not believe that they've cleaned their act up.
People talk about it as being a massive oil tanker. You can't change direction very easily.
Are we capable of regulating the banks properly? Of course we are. Do we want to? Is the really probably important question.
The British government has turned the page. It has other priorities, and HSBC has other ambitions. China needs its services. Beijing wants to set out to conquer the world.
Could you imagine that China might become the main shareholder of HSBC?
Yes. I would be surprised if some Chinese entities are not holding HSBC shares today. They probably already.
At the end of 2015, the Chinese President Xi Jinping arrives in London. The United Kingdom unrolls the red carpet and celebrates the Sino-British friendship with great fanfare.
Your visit to the United Kingdom marks a milestone in this unprecedented year of cooperation and friendship between the United Kingdom and China, as we celebrate the ties between our two countries and prepare to take them to ambitious new heights.
This new golden age makes London the base of Chinese investments in Europe, and HSBC the armed wing of Beijing to acquire high-tech Western technology. The bank marks a great success in sponsoring the signing of the nuclear contract of Hinkley Point. Two of the most modern reactors, built on English soil by French engineers of EDF, a third of the project was financed by China.
这是近年来中英合作的旗舰项目，将为今后双方生化物质合作发挥示范作用。
This contract of the century is estimated at more than 20 billion euros.
China forced the UK to OK Hinkley. Clearly, their arm is being, twisted very, very strongly by Chinese financial heft, which threatens to withdraw significant investment in the UK if the deal doesn't go ahead. The UK has agreed a deal that nobody else would agree to. Essentially, this was a political decision to substantiate UK's economic ties with China as almost a symbolic decision.
By yielding their energy ply to the Chinese, the British leaders have renounced part of their national sovereignty. And behind the scenes, HSBC is omnipresent, It advises EDF, defends the interests of Chinese shareholders, and passes billions of euros from Beijing through its accounts.
HSBC helps because you need a bank on the ground in order to facilitate transactions. There's funding agreements, there's raising money, there's bonds, and there's ways to do that that need to be incorporated through a standing major bank. And that has been HSBC for China.
The nuclear power stations of Hinkley Point are part of the great Chinese projects called the New Silk Road, a kind of Marshall Plan launched to multiply trade between Beijing and the rest of the world. Construction of roads, railroads, ports. Nothing is overlooked to promote goods made in China and to increase the strength of the new emperor, Xi Jinping.
Son objectif principal, c'est de conquérir le marché européen. Ce sont les 500 millions d'Européens. Beaucoup des investissements chinois à l'étranger sont accompagnés par HSBC, y compris Hinkley Point. HSBC a l'avantage d'être une marque reconnue mondialement, une marque positive, ce qui n'est pas le cas de la Chine en tant que pays, ce qui n'est pas le cas des banques chinoises.
But there is one key problem here. Nuclear is different. Nuclear is different from other market forces, other forms of energy, and other financial deals. There is no country in the world, including America, who would allow China into its key nuclear energy infrastructure. So it is astonishing that China will be allowed access to this key, sensitive network.
The century of China has begun, and HSBC changes masters. The former bank of the traders of opium, formerly in the service of Her Majesty, now operates under China. It must help the communist regime realize its dream, to become in turn a giant of the financial world. The Beijing executives learned a lesson from the financial crisis of 2008. They no longer want to rely on the dollar and the crazy bets of Wall Street traders.
China is not yet a superpower, economic power, for the simple reason that it doesn't have a financial sector and it doesn't have a currency which reflects this influence and this standing in the world. And so it is essential to somehow to close the gap and for China to have a currency that can be used in its trade and a currency that can be used also in its investment abroad.
La Chine a les moyens de ses ambitions. C'est le banquier du monde. Elle dispose des plus grandes réserves en devises, que ce soit en dollars, en euros, en yens, en francs suisses. Mais ce sont les monnaies des autres, elle ne les contrôle pas. Et c'est pourquoi elle entend imposer sa propre monnaie, qui est le yuan, dans la cour des grands. Elle a 20 ans devant elle pour arriver à cet objectif.
What they really want is a world in which the dollar isn't so dominant. And so in that sense, London can play, as it is doing, an important role in the trading of Chinese currency, the RMB, and a big role for Chinese involvement in international finance.
To dethrone the dollar king, China must have its currency, the yuan, accepted as the currency of reference in international trade. Beijing lags behind others. Its currency of the people is virtually unknown in the markets.
HSBC is one of the world's leading foreign exchange houses, and HSBC has a very strong position in the currency markets in Hong Kong as well as London, and as a result, HSBC is a very natural bridge between China and the city.
HSBC is the first foreign bank to convert the Chinese currency. The great works of the Silk Road, finance in yuan, serve as a Trojan horse to impose its currency on the international scene. HSBC is making its next move to become the pipeline of Chinese capital invested in London. 40 years after the oil dollars of the Gulf, it's the billions coming from Beijing that make the city's mouth water. And it's the finance minister, George Osborne, HSBC's best friend, who is still wielding the controls.
More trade and more investment with China means more business and more jobs for Britain.
The minister has especially relaxed the regulations to accommodate Chinese capital. It is the last stage of a high-risk policy that opens the doors of international markets to a financial world led by Beijing.
Chinese money is the black hole of black holes within the global financial system. We have a sense of how much Chinese money might be out there. We have a sense of how much might be leaving China, but we've only seen small snippets of that from Swiss leaks and from Panama Papers.
La finance chinoise est totalement différente de la finance occidentale que nous connaissons. D'abord, elle n'est pas soumise aux mêmes impératifs de transparence et aux exigences de réglementation. Ensuite, elle est à la solde du Parti communiste chinois dont elle sert les intérêts politiques. Et enfin, parallèlement à cette finance chinoise officielle dont on ne connaît rien, il existe une finance parallèle totalement opaque, totalement informelle, sans trace, qui est constituée d'une nébuleuse de dettes et de prêts. C'est la finance de l'ombre qui constitue un péril potentiel pour l'économie occidentale.
There is a massive amount of work to be done in China to make the financial system and the banks more robust. And when I say robust, means a system that is able to withstand the movement of capital. So capital in and capital out, inflows and outflows. Then the government doesn't know how to manage this flow and they are unregulated. And that is the fundamental problem, and that could lead to even some kind of crash.
As you have firms of the stature and the size of HSBC marrying up with rising Chinese banks that are now so huge, yeah, it's a recipe for potential disaster.
En arrimant la finance chinoise à la finance occidentale, HSBC a fait entrer, si on peut dire, le diable dans la boîte. Personne ne peut s'opposer à Pékin sur le plan financier. Personne n'est capable ou ne veut refuser les capitaux chinois dont les économies occidentales ont besoin. Et personne ne peut s'opposer aux hommes de main de Pékin que sont les banquiers d'HSBC.
Ten years after the crisis, financial stability is an illusion. By helping China become the world's banker, HSBC has created a new threat. So far, Beijing has always managed to contain its financial crises within its borders. But today, the banksters have taken down the firewalls. And with the first spark, the fire will spread to the west. And in the face of the impotence of the states, it is again the people who will pay the bill.